Hello, everybody. Welcome into this very special edition of Cover 4 Live, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. My name is Brandon Adams. I've got the entire Dog Nation team with us as well as we're reacting real time to the SEC schedule announcement taking place right now. I point to my left because that's what the TV is here in my living room. We have just found out Alabama's opponents for the upcoming season. They had games against Missouri and Kentucky. We are waiting to find out news about the Georgia Bulldogs in all of this. The news will be coming fast and furious over the course of the next couple of minutes, so buckle up for the ride here. I've got Connor Riley, Jeff Sintel, and Mike Griffith. Connor, what do you glean from the fact that Bama adds two of the easier opponents from the SEC East, Kentucky, Missouri? That is certainly not who the original rumors were that Alabama would be playing. I think Connor may be muted. We'll get Connor unmuted there. I got to Connor first.
Cover 4. I know. So we have a little bit of news here. Arkansas will play both Georgia and Florida, so splitting the baby there with the SEC teams. So with that, you know, there was a lot of talk about Florida not wanting Alabama. Florida, I think, clearly avoids Alabama there, and Georgia ends up getting Arkansas. So what we know right now, Arkansas kind of drawing the short end of the stick, having to play the SEC West and the two best teams in the SEC East.
All right, so we'll add that there as well. Looks like Florida's coming in here too. They're going to add the game against Arkansas. This is going to be fast here at the moment. Somebody from our team's got their TV volume turned up. We need to make sure we turn that down, not give away the SEC network for free over our Dog Nation video channels. Mike Griffith, let me go to you here for a moment as we're finding out about all of this and trying to keep up with it. Auburn adding Tennessee and South Carolina. What's your reaction to what we're seeing thus far?
Yeah, it's interesting, BA. I mean, they obviously didn't go with the next games on the rotation model, so you knew all that time they had to do something a little different, and we also knew that not everybody was going to be happy with this.
So Florida's also adding a game here against Texas A&M, the preseason number 13 team. Georgia is out now. Georgia will add Arkansas here, as Connor Riley just mentioned, and I'm waiting to see the other addition here for Georgia, who the Dogs will add for the upcoming season, but it's Mississippi State. So Georgia has added Arkansas and Mississippi State. Ironically, I think the two opponents that had initially been rumored that Georgia might play. So Georgia, after all the hand-wringing about what might happen, Georgia adds Arkansas and Mississippi State. Jeff, if you're a UGA fan, I think you take that as a pretty big win. Now, there are reasons to pay attention to both the Hogs and the Bulldogs this year, and we'll get more into that here in a moment. But in terms of adding Arkansas, adding Mississippi State, this is certainly better than it could have been, is it not?
Yeah, you know, you look at the straight math, and these are two teams that were 8-17 a year ago, and now you pair that with Alabama and Auburn, which were 20-6 a year ago, and Georgia, which had, in my opinion, a lot of folks, the toughest SEC East going over to the West, old school, original build of their schedule, now gets perhaps the very best pairing they could get in terms of the next two from the SEC West with Arkansas and Mississippi State.
And Connor, if you're Florida, you know, I don't think you've got a lot of room to complain here. You know, yes, you had a game against Texas A&M. Yet when you look at the overall balance of the schedule, you know, I don't think it's wildly in favor of really either side. Florida's got preseason number 5 LSU, now adding preseason number 13 Texas A&M. Georgia's got preseason number 3 Alabama. I'm going off the coaches poll. Already had preseason number 11. Auburn. From this standpoint, it seems like, at least for the top two teams in the SEC East, this is pretty well balanced right now. I think on the basis of where I'm seeing of this thus far, it seems like the league has done a pretty good job on this.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're Arkansas right now, I think if you're a Georgia or a Florida fan, you're pretty happy and content with what you get. Florida, you avoid Alabama. And, you know, I asked you before we got on here, got up live, yeah, you said it sounded pretty fair if Florida's going to play the number 5 and 13 teams, and Georgia's going to play the number 3 and 11 teams. That's both
exactly right.
Get teams we all think are going to finish at the bottom of the SEC West, with Florida getting Ole Miss and Arkansas, and Georgia now getting Arkansas and Mississippi State. I will note that while we had said that those games were the next two on the schedule, the home roads are actually flipped. Georgia will go to Arkansas, and Mississippi State will come to Georgia, whereas in 2021, Georgia's set to go to Arkansas. And then in 2022, Arkansas, I believe, is set to come to Athens.
And Mike, I know you're working here, so we're going to expect you to be getting some stuff up at dognation.com. So you'll be typing away as you're talking to us. But if you had to dump on an SEC team in terms of the schedule, Sam Pittman in Arkansas actually seems like a pretty good choice to do that. Pittman's a first-year coach. He's a beloved figure coming back home. He's got lots of job security right now. If anyone needs to so-called take one for the team and play just an absolutely abysmal schedule, I'm not being funny here. I'm being completely serious. Arkansas is a great candidate to be able to do that. Pittman could go winless this year. It's not going to change the way the Hawks fans feel about him. The tougher schedule, I think, only gives him even more rope in terms of how he'll be treated by Arkansas fans. So someone was going to get the short end of the stick. I actually think it's really smart to make sure that it's a team like Arkansas that gets stuck with an additional game against Georgia, additional game against Florida, because Arkansas fans, I think, are the most likely fans in this league right now to take that in stride.
I'd agree with that, BA. I mean, I think this is the best case scenario for Georgia. I mean, I think Arkansas, you know, in terms of West teams, I think Arkansas is undoubtedly the worst in the West. If you're going to travel anywhere, it is a long trip, but that's probably the easiest opponent to play on the road. Mississippi State coming in here, you know, brand new head coach, certainly intriguing matchup with Mike Leach's offense, but I think this is the best case scenario for Georgia.
Robert Reynolds on Facebook says, who did Florida get? Let's recap that here a little bit. They do add the game against Arkansas. They add the game against Texas A&M. So the Florida schedule has gotten tougher because of this. The Georgia schedule, in comparison to what it would have been, the 12-game schedule, including Georgia Tech and Middle Tennessee State and Louisiana Monroe and East Tennessee State, it's tougher now than it would have been otherwise. However, Georgia, I think, got about as easy draw as it could possibly get. Now, Jeff, as we get deeper into this conversation, we'll take some comments more too, including Robert, who just joined us on Facebook. I think there are ways in which both these games for Georgia are actually pretty interesting. And I've talked about this on my show, Dog Nation Daily, before. But just at first glance, at first blush, I don't think you could have expected a much better draw than what Georgia got here.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty logical statement right there, Brandon. You look at some of the conference and what schools are getting. And like we said earlier, I thought Georgia had the toughest draw of the SEC West pool already with their rotational pre-scheduled games. And now you add a pretty decent mix there with Arkansas and Mississippi State. Sure, the Sam Pittman storylines will be touted considerably. Mississippi State, that means Georgia will have to go against a pass-happy offense. You know, as these pop in my mind, Brandon, I think I move LSU up a little bit in my predicted order of the SEC West, because the LSU Tigers, the defending league champions, they go to Vandy and they host Mizzou. That's almost as astounding to me as what Mizzou has in adding Alabama and LSU to their schedules as well. That's just a nightmare for a first-year coach at Missouri this year.
BA, to go back to Arkansas for a bit, I have a question for you. You were high on Sam Pittman going into the year. You liked their win total and where it was. If I gave you half a win, are you going to take the over there? That schedule's brutal. Absolutely brutal.
So for the folks who are maybe just joining us, don't watch us all the time, the original Vegas over-under for Arkansas was 3.5. And I said that I thought Arkansas had a chance to exceed 3.5 wins this year. Would I take them at a half a win right now? That certainly is a very different scenario. But, and Connor's right, it's one of the more brutal schedules you ever see, especially truncated into kind of a 10-game deal like this. But if you're Kirby Smart, I guarantee you that his feeling about playing Arkansas is very different than the average fan. We all look at this and say, oh, that's a team that won very few games last year, expected to win very few games this year, but they have a lot of experience at quarterback in Felipe Franks. That's not a guy that's going to get Florida to an SEC championship, but in terms of making the worst team in the league a little more competent, I think Franks actually gets it done in that regard. Kendall Briles is a former Broyles Award finalist. I think he's a really sharp assistant. I thought that Pittman made exceptional coordinator hires. I think that Barry Odom's a really, really sharp defensive mind as well. So Kirby Smart probably would acknowledge privately that, yes, Georgia kind of got a little bit of a break here by playing Arkansas, but it's not like Georgia will be kicking up its feet and saying, oh, this is an easy win. There are some things that Arkansas will do under Sam Pittman that will make them more dangerous than the Chad Morris version of Arkansas you've seen these last couple of years.
Right. And I think with playing Mississippi State, it's a little with what Mike Leach has done in the past and how different that Mississippi State team figures to be from every other team in the SEC. It's a little bit like preparing, I think, for Paul Johnson in Georgia Tech, in a sense that they're going to be so pass happy, spreading it around. It's so fundamentally different than what you're going to see, even from spread concepts for the rest of the season, that is maybe a little bit more of a tricky game to prepare for. I will say, I've seen Tennessee's schedule now.
Woo.
There's an SEC East team that has a gripe. They get A&M and Auburn. Tennessee was a team we were talking a lot about this year as a potential. Is this the year they make the leap? With having to play Alabama, Auburn, and A&M all out of the West, that is a really tough draw for a team that I think really needs to, if it's trying to make that leap, needs to kind of do it this year, and this schedule just did them no favors.
Well, Mike, let me bring you on this because I know you know the situation in Knoxville pretty well. I don't believe that Tennessee's set up for success this year. I think that they've got obviously some elements in place, but the momentum they finished last season with, I don't expect them to pick up to begin this year. Is there a way for Jeremy Pruitt to spin this? Schedule gets tougher, expectations go down. Does this help him buy more time in his honeymoon there if this becomes the kind of schedule that he's just not likely to be able to tiptoe through very easily?
Yeah, I think it probably does be. And like you said, I wasn't buying into Tennessee this year anyway. I thought they were going to have some troubles. I actually like Kentucky. You know, the closer I looked at it, I actually like Kentucky a little bit more. But certainly now they can sit back and go, well, look at the schedule. You know, it was the schedule's fault. But I think this was going to be a really tough year for Tennessee regardless. And guys, I got to say this. The problem with Sam Pittman's going to have is they've gone from an offense that was recruiting to a wide open system to now trying to run. And to me, it's a worst case scenario because you don't necessarily have the personnel to run the sort of stuff that Sam Pittman would like to run as far as the heavies and the bigs.
Oh, I think you're wrong on that, Mike. I think that Kendall Briles is going to have a lot of influence on the Arkansas offense. I'm not an X's and O's expert. I won't pretend to be. But in terms of philosophies, I mean, I think that Kendall Briles is going to bring a lot of that Baylor-style stuff with him. I don't think that Sam Pittman's going to, you know, the version of the Georgia offense you saw these last couple of years, I think Pittman's a sharp guy. I think he's going to give Kendall Briles some freedom to try to build something different, especially knowing that you have to go to Texas to recruit there. And I don't want to get into an Arkansas show here, but over the course of the long haul, you've got to recruit at Texas. Most of the Texas high school teams are running a version of that offense anyway. I think that Kendall Briles is going to have a lot of influence at what goes on in Arkansas. And when Georgia plays that game, whenever it is on the upcoming schedule, I'm sure we'll find out soon. I believe that week, certainly Kirby will be talking a lot about Briles. I believe the Georgia fans will be talking a lot about him there as well. He doesn't have much talent in place in Arkansas for right now, but from a system standpoint, this is true for both these games. You know, Mike Leach is a guy with KJ Costello at quarterback, you know, Kylan Hill at running back. I don't think they're going to be very good. I don't think Leach is a good personality fit in the SEC, Jeff. But in terms of yards and points, they're going to probably rack up a lot of that. So I think for Georgia, while it picks up two relatively easy games in terms of expected win-loss totals, the schematic stuff with Leach is also going to be really difficult with, once again, a guy in Costello that's got some major college experience. That's the kind of thing that in a normal situation, Kirby would have analysts working overtime watching as much Washington State, Texas Tech film, Stanford film to pick up stuff on Costello. You'd be watching a lot of that film over the course of an offseason to get ready for a game like that. And as it stands now, that's going to happen on short notice.
Yeah, and you know, I kind of wonder, you know, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that, but do you wonder over under, this is simple, I know everybody likes that. Do you think the offensive impact that Mike Leach will have in the SEC, specifically in the SEC West, is that going to be over or under what we saw last year with Rich Rodriguez and the Ole Miss offense? I know they won't have the pieces, the specific, you know, kind of game breaker impact pieces that Ole Miss had at a couple of skill positions, but I kind of wonder the guru that he is, if he'll have sort of the same open it up, throw it around, score some point success that Ole Miss experienced a year ago.
Well, when I think of Ole Miss a year ago, I think a lot of that being on the ground. The LSU game comes to mind where they're racking up stats. LSU ultimately wins the game. I could see that a lot for Mississippi State this year. And go back and watch some of the Texas Tech games. This is a perfect example of this. Playing LSU in a bowl game a few years ago, for instance, some of the better Big 12 teams where, you know, Tech is in that game because, let's face it, when you spread guys out wide enough, when your quarterback's accurate enough, there are going to be a lot of open receivers to throw to, Connor. It's just a matter of, can you be physical enough when it really matters to win a game? Leach's teams typically aren't. That's why they lost to Washington, for instance, over and over again in the Pac-12. Better recruits, more physicality, usually resulted in a loss for Wazoo. But in terms of keeping it fun, keeping it close, keeping it interesting, I think there will be a lot of that from Mississippi State. Eventually, Bulldogs fans are going to grow tired of it, but for a little bit, it's probably going to be must-see TV.
Yeah, and as someone who's talked a lot about KJ Costello, I think he might be a potential better talent than what Georgia has in Jamie Newman. But to your point, Washington, I believe, at Washington State, Leach lost 7 consecutive times to Washington. He will not get a chance to do that at Ole Miss, or at Mississippi State, excuse me. If he loses to Ole Miss on a regular basis with the way that Egg Bowl is set up, he won't make it that long. But to sort of recenter things on Georgia a bit here, after all, we are a Georgia covering machine. Do you feel better or worse about Georgia's chances of, let's just say, getting to the SEC championship game today than you did 4 hours ago?
Much better. For me, it's much better. Not just because of who I expect Georgia to beat. I'm going to tell you right now, Texas A&M is going to beat Florida. Now, I think that Georgia's going to beat Florida anyway, but A&M is going to beat Florida. First of all, this is going to be a major storyline. Dan Mullen, who never beat SEC West competition, he was at Mississippi State, has to now play 2 additional SEC West games, A&M being one of those. Jimbo Fisher owned Florida while he was the Florida State coach. He gets a chance to coach in that series again against Dan Mullen. There was never a head-to-head matchup between these two guys when Fisher was at Florida State. But my belief in Georgia as the winner of the SEC East is now much higher than it was, because I think that Georgia has found 2 additional wins. I think that Florida has found an additional loss. Mike, where do you come down on that?
Yeah, I'm with you, BA. I think Texas A&M probably has the upper hand on Florida as well. I just like the experience that A&M has. And, I thought Florida was kind of shaky to begin with. I would also say that, Georgia coaches have got to be doing high fives. They're getting the 2 lousiest teams in the West Division here. These are both automatic wins. And, but we say they're getting, but let's remember, they started out with a trip to Alabama, which is arguably the toughest road game in the SEC outside of Sanford Stadium, and Auburn, which is always a dangerous opponent for Georgia. I know that, they haven't won in Athens for quite some time, but, the minute that you say that, a team like South Carolina comes in here and the kicker misses 2 field goals and a quarterback that hasn't been picked off all year throws 3 picks. So Auburn's capable of, if you beat yourself, they'll let you do that. That's not a lousy team. I don't think Georgia could lose to Mississippi State or Arkansas if it tried.
Ronald Poole, by the way, on YouTube says, do we have dates for these games? It's important to note that we do not have dates. The SEC giving a gift to the content machine here by trickling this out a little bit at a time, 10-game schedule. Here's your 2 opponents. Here are the dates of the games. And frankly, when we find out the 10 dates of the games for Georgia, that's actually going to be even bigger news than this, because the schedule could look, and I expect you would agree, it will look wildly different than we initially thought it was going to look. We don't have those dates as of yet. And let me also give you a quick programming note here. Let's do about 10 more minutes, including some comments, some thoughts. We'll get off the air about 6:30. People have got dinner plans who are watching us. So if you can stick with us for a few more minutes, we'll take you to about 6:30 here on this very special edition of Cover 4 Live presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. Don't forget, Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. They live in Georgia, they work in Georgia communities just like the one that you're living in, taking good care of people in those communities. Find them and check them out. Georgia Farm Bureau doing some great things for you. We appreciate them making Cover 4 Live here possible today, brought to you by Georgia Farm Bureau. Jeff, on the subject of what Connor brought up, if you're a Georgia fan, should you feel better today about Georgia's chances of winning the SEC East, knowing that Florida's at A&M, Georgia's at Arkansas, Mississippi State, have the win percentages, the likelihood of win percentages now gone up?
Yeah, I think it definitely has. Depending on who Georgia added, I think that over-under for Georgia wins could have been around 7.5, 8.5, that range. Like everybody's noted astutely, Georgia adds 2 very winnable games. The things that really jump out at me, Brandon, about this is poor rookie coaches, man. They're getting demolished this year in your first year, which is probably just going to be a tax write-off here for a lot of them. Remember, a lot of these coaches, athletic departments won't have room to buy out any coaches after a year like this and limited finances. But the other 2 things for me that jump up is I think Tennessee's chances of scratching the door or knocking on the door in the East go down. And I think LSU, to me, looks like very much a number 2 or number 3 team in the SEC West now, considering what the schedule gods gave them. That was almost the next greatest thing as compared to Joe Burrow being a graduate student that can spend 20 extra hours, 30 extra hours of his own time working on LSU's opponents, Brandon. But I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait for you, Brandon, to start complaining about this schedule because Georgia will not have another marquee home game to replace that Florida game in terms of attracting all those big recruits for the 2020 schedule.
Well, hey, I don't think they're going to have many recruits in stadium anyway, and I think the fan limit. I don't want to stand on Mike's corner when it comes to complaining about Georgia, Florida being in Jacksonville. In other words, let me bring all three of you in on this for a moment, though. Dan Wolken, professional troll, but also college football columnist, did bring up today the idea of SEC coaches complaining off the record about what the schedule is going to look like. Glenn Gilbo, who's covered LSU for a long time and has had some reporting on some schedule stuff over the course of the last few days, mentioned the possibility that the rotation the SEC might go with was the 2024-2025 rotation. Ultimately, that's not what the SEC has done here. They've just seemingly kind of a hybrid of games being selected for these opponents. But between the initial reporting that, hey, maybe it'd just be the next two rotational games, and that was a sort of immediately pushed back against, how much do the three of you think infighting really was a part of the untold story of how we got to the games that we got to? Florida not playing Alabama, Georgia playing Mississippi State and Arkansas, LSU, Jeff kind of make the case, maybe cut a little bit of a break here. How much of the infighting behind the scenes do you think ultimately contributed to how this played out? Connor, I'll start with you.
Based off what I've seen from the big power teams, LSU getting Missouri and Vanderbilt, Alabama getting Kentucky and Missouri, Georgia getting Mississippi State and Arkansas, and even Florida, I think, getting A&M and Arkansas as well. I think from the big boys, the guys that can theoretically throw their weight around a little bit more, I would say that they're probably pretty happy and okay with this, and there's not going to be a whole lot of chirping. The guys who you might hear from, and you've already heard, Honey Juszczyk, the Arkansas AD, has already come out and said that Arkansas is now playing the hardest schedule in the country this year, which is hard to disagree with. So
right.
I think, you might hear some griping from the likes of Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri, maybe even Sam Pittman at Arkansas, but from the top level, I find it hard to see anyone really complaining. I'm sure Tennessee fans will complain because they can complain when the sun is out and shining.
Well, just real quick, though, I guess my point, though, is how much do you think complaining prior to this led to the end result we got today?
I think very little. I think based off what we saw Florida get with Alabama having to already play Georgia and a good Tennessee team, I think in the crossover, while maybe there may have been some specifically on Alabama and Florida just not play each other, I think from a wider standpoint, LSU and Georgia were not really, I don't think, going out there and complaining and trying to finagle their way into the schedules that they ended up getting.
And, of course, Connor mentioned Arkansas, maybe the toughest schedule in the country. That rank in some metrics had been South Carolina prior to all of this. They essentially traded a game with Clemson for a game with Auburn. Still a tough opponent, but maybe a little bit of a step down in weight class for South Carolina in terms of how it all shakes out. Jeff, how about for you? It's been message board fodder, and some of that's traveled to the more mainstream circles of college football media. Do you think a soap opera behind the scenes led to the result that we got here on paper?
I don't think so. I think that sounds good to think about it now and play in the headlines. But, it seems like if it did happen, then Alabama and Florida had to get what they wanted. And I can't see both of those conference powers, the way this has to be built and aligned the way things go. I can't see both of these schools getting what they wanted with their chirping or a big boy like that. To me, Brandon, when I look at this schedule right now, I think it cements the fact that I think Alabama would be the most likely team in the SEC to go undefeated. I realize that they're going to play a Georgia, and I realize they're going to play an LSU, and I realize they're going to play an Auburn. But, with them adding those two games on the schedule and them also getting Georgia at home, I look at Alabama as the team most likely in this conference to go undefeated.
Yeah, listen, if it was Florida that was complaining and that's what held this up, at least some suspicion had been out there of that. That to me comes across as a little bit Weasley because of how easy Florida's schedule looked on paper prior to all of this. If Alabama had a gripe about potentially adding a game with Florida, knowing it already had a game with Georgia and the entirety of the SEC West, as much as I'm not an Alabama fan, I actually could kind of understand where they're coming from on that, maybe just a little bit. But Mike, you like the SEC soap opera as much as I do. How much do you think all of that played into this?
I think some of it did, Brandon. I think that, probably the SEC kind of put the model out there and threw it out there to the ADs and said, hey, if you've got any questions or concerns, hit us back. We'll work with you and see what we can move around and see what concessions we can make that make everybody happy. Kind of the way the The Auburn game got moved up this year. Auburn and Georgia were both unhappy with that game in November, and they needed a dance partner. And Tennessee said, "We'll do it." That's how that kind of stuff works. I'm sure at the end of the day, you're going to make some people unhappy, but it's glaring to me that Florida and Alabama aren't playing when they were next on the rotation.
Well, be that as it may, Alex Conway says, what is Georgia's schedule for this season? So we know the 10 opponents. It's the entirety of the SEC East. It's already going to be Auburn and Alabama from the SEC West. It's now Arkansas and Mississippi State added to that. Those are the 10 opponents for Georgia this upcoming season. Over on Facebook for a couple more comments. We'll get ready to go right now.
Brandon, let me just jump in right now. When we're looking at the conference, especially the SEC East, case can easily be made that every team today, especially considering what's coming out of the mouth of Mike about Texas A&M and Florida, and also Brandon Adams had that as well. Every SEC team in the conference picked up a very losable game, a difficult game in these new schedule pairings,
except for Alabama. Except for Alabama.
I'm talking the SEC West here. I mean, SEC West and SEC East. Every team in the East, I'm talking about Georgia's competition in the East, picked up a game, a much more difficult game, and their schedules got tougher.
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. Georgia's schedule was already tough, but in terms of where everything stood prior to 6 p.m. today, Georgia, I think, definitely has to come across as a huge winner right now. A lot of folks, Barry Watkins and others, kind of asking about what we're going to know about these dates. The dates are going to matter, and we'll get ready to wrap up with this. Mike, these dates are going to matter because, now that we know the schedules, the tough teams, someone's going to end up finding a little bit of a cluster of tougher games, a little tighter together than they probably would like for it to. And maybe it's Georgia's turn to be mad about that once that comes out. Maybe Auburn and Alabama a little too close, Florida and whoever just a little too close. Maybe it'll be Georgia's turn to take that on the chin on the heels of maybe feeling like they were the kind of the winner here right now.
Yeah, I thought they took it on the chin last year. I mean, they played 5 teams that had bye weeks before they played them. In the 2 bye weeks that Georgia had before games, the opponents also had bye weeks. So they were kind of -3 in that. Like I said, and I've written, look, Georgia, you can say it's a break, but your schedule starts with at Alabama and Auburn, 2 games, 2 of the toughest teams in the West, arguably. So the fact that it just balanced out, nobody from Georgia needs to apologize from that, especially when you consider, playing Auburn back-to-back and 12 and 13 on the road. They took one for the team. Last year, the 5, teams having byes before they played Georgia, something I brought up to Greg Sankey more than once. And he said, oh, well, that's the max. It couldn't have gotten any worse than that. So to me, I don't think Georgia fans need to apologize for a balanced schedule. If you're going to play the 2 best teams in the West, you might as well also play the 2 worst.
Let's do this. Final thought from everybody. Connor, winners, losers from today. Where does it stand with you in your mind now? We know that Georgia's adding Mississippi State and Arkansas, and we're awaiting those dates.
You have to call Georgia a winner just given you don't get an A&M or an LSU added on top of Alabama and Arkansas, or an Alabama and an Auburn, excuse me. And if I can go one off-the-board winner here, fans of revenge games, Felipe Franks goes to Florida.
Ooh, I didn't think about that.
With all the flack that he has gotten from that fan base over the years, boy, oh boy, would that be something if he plays well and Arkansas finds a way to win that game.
Let me tell you something. If Felipe Franks finds a way to beat Florida, I will do Dog Nation Daily wearing a Felipe Franks Arkansas jersey that Monday. I will don the Hogs colors, Frank's name on the back. If he finds a way to get that done, that would be one of the sweetest things imaginable. Connor, that's a great point. Jeff, how about a final thought from you on what you've learned here today?
I think if folks out there are looking for another reason to enjoy this beautiful Friday evening, you would say that Georgia's SEC championship hopes, their East championship hopes, and their national championship hopes went up today.
Yeah, I think that's really true. Mike, a final thought from you?
Yeah, winner for Georgia. Best case scenario. I think Georgia fans ought to feel real good going into the weekend.
Yeah, I think that's really true as well. Mike will be back on video later on tonight with his Friday Night Mike broadcast. I'll have more thoughts on that. I'll see you back on Monday for Dog Nation Daily. Thanks for being here as part of this special edition of our Cover 4 Live, brought to you by Georgia Farm Bureau. Normally we do this Thursdays at 6 p.m., but listen, because of the fact we're all pretty much home all the time anyway, because of coronavirus, technology now allows us to all be together and do this. So when the news warrants, we'll try to find a way to do a lot more of that with you. And it would not be possible that our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau, as I said before, they're always the home team. They're taking really good care of folks here in the state of Georgia. They live in your community. They work in your community. They play in your community. They are people just like you in your community, taking care, providing big savings and home, auto, life insurance. Please find them online. It's gfbinsurance.com. That's gfbinsurance.com. It'll get you in touch with Georgia Farm Bureau. You'll have a great weekend. Georgia adds Mississippi State and Arkansas. We await the dates of those games and the rest of the Georgia schedule, but it'll be all fun to find out together. We'll do that soon. Talk to you soon, everybody.